The engineer who wasn't looking. The afternoon Sophie asked him if he was seeing someone, Marcus realized that sometimes the person you least expect becomes the person you can't imagine living without. Marcus Webb was 38 years old, a civil engineer who spent his days designing drainage systems and structural foundations for commercial buildings across the Pacific Northwest. He worked for a mid-sized firm in Tacoma, the kind of company where everyone knew everyone and office birthdays were celebrated with grocery store sheet cake and awkward singing. His marriage had ended 2 years earlier when his wife admitted she'd been unhappy for most of their 7 years together and had finally gathered the courage to say it out loud. Marcus had signed the divorce papers in their lawyer's conference room on a gray Tuesday afternoon and driven home to an empty apartment he'd rented specifically because it was close to work and didn't remind him of anything. He wasn't bitter, just tired. He had gone through a quiet ending with a woman who loved the stability he provided, but not the man who provided it. It was a Thursday in late September when Sophie Lynn started at the firm, assigned to the desk 3 down from Marcus in the open-plan office that made private conversations impossible and focused work a challenge. She was 34, a structural engineer who'd moved from San Francisco after burning out at a larger firm where 80-hour weeks were considered normal and taking lunch was seen as a character flaw. She had dark hair cut short, wore blazers over band t-shirts in a way that somehow worked, and possessed the kind of quick intelligence that made her dangerous in project meetings. Marcus noticed her immediately, mostly because she'd shown up on her first day with a houseplant for her desk and a box of expensive donuts for the office, which earned her instant goodwill from everyone on the floor. By the end of her first week, she'd memorized everyone's names, figured out the office coffee machine's temperamental quirks, and suggested a fix to a drainage calculation that had been giving Marcus headaches for 3 days. They became work friends in the easy way that happens when 2 people share similar technical backgrounds and a mutual appreciation for competence. Marcus helped Sophie navigate the firm's labyrinthine project management software. Sophie helped Marcus troubleshoot a foundation design that kept failing the load analysis. They ate lunch together in the break room sometimes, along with 2 other engineers from their team, and talked about projects and deadlines and the eternal question of why the office microwave always smelled like burnt popcorn. On this particular Thursday, about 6 weeks after Sophie had started, Marcus was standing at the coffee station refilling his mug when Sophie appeared beside him with her own empty cup and a slightly nervous expression. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sophie said, reaching for the coffee pot. Marcus paused mid-pour. In the 6 weeks he'd known Sophie, she'd asked him approximately 700 questions about work, the city, good places to eat, and whether the firm's health insurance was as mediocre as it seemed, but never anything personal. "Sure."
Are you seeing anyone?
Marcus nearly spilled coffee on his hand. He set the pot down carefully and looked at Sophie, who was watching him with an expression that was trying very hard to seem casual and failing. "No." "Why?" "Just curious." Sophie poured her own coffee, added too much creamer, and stirred it with intense concentration. "You never mention anyone. You don't talk about weekend plans that involve another person. You leave right at 5:30 every day. I figured you were either single or had a very low-maintenance relationship." "Definitely single," Marcus said. "Have been for 2 years. Haven't really thought about dating since." Sophie looked up from her coffee. "By choice or by circumstance?" "Little of both, I guess. After my divorce, I just didn't have the energy to put myself back out there. And then it became easier to not try than to try and risk getting hurt again." Marcus picked up his mug. "Why are you asking?" Sophie took a sip of her coffee, made a face like she'd added too much creamer even for her taste, and set the mug down. "Because I'm trying to decide if I should ask you out, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't about to accidentally blow up someone's relationship." Marcus felt the office tilt slightly. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone's desk phone rang twice and went to voicemail. Outside the window, a delivery truck beeped as it backed into the loading zone. Sophie was standing 3 feet away looking at him like she'd just asked him to check a calculation, not like she'd just fundamentally altered the trajectory of his entire day. "You want to ask me out?" Marcus repeated slowly. "I do." Sophie's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. "I've wanted to ask you out since approximately week 3, but I'm new and you're not, and I didn't want to make things weird if you weren't interested. But I'm also not great at subtlety, and I'm terrible at waiting around for other people to make the first move, so here we are." Marcus set down his coffee mug before he dropped it. "I thought we were just colleagues." "We are colleagues. Good colleagues. But I'd like to be more than colleagues." "If you're open to that." Sophie picked up her coffee mug and then set it back down without drinking any. "And if you're not, that's completely fine. We can pretend this conversation never happened and go back to arguing about soil compaction ratios like normal people." "I'm open to it," Marcus said, and the words came out before he'd fully processed them. Sophie's expression shifted from carefully neutral to genuinely surprised. You are? Yeah. Marcus felt a smile starting at the corners of his mouth. I am. I just didn't think you'd be interested in me. Why not? Because you're brilliant and funny, and you moved here from San Francisco where you probably had your pick of interesting people. And I'm a divorced engineer who goes home at 5:30 every day to watch documentaries and reorganize my bookshelf. Sophie laughed, a real laugh that made two people at nearby desks look over. Marcus, I moved here specifically to get away from interesting people. Interesting people in San Francisco work 90 hours a week and think sleep is for the weak. You're stable and kind, and you actually leave work at a reasonable hour. That's not boring. That's called having your life together. I don't know if I'd say I have my life together. You have a plant on your desk that's still alive. That alone puts you ahead of 80% of the population. Sophie picked up both their coffee mugs and walked them over to a small table by the window, away from the main cluster of desks. Marcus followed, feeling like he was in a conversation that had jumped ahead several chapters while he was still processing the table of contents. They sat down, and Sophie leaned forward with her elbows on the table. So, since you're open to it, are you free this weekend? I'm free, Marcus said. Saturday? Dinner? Saturday works. Good. Sophie smiled, and it was the first time Marcus had seen her look genuinely nervous and happy at the same time. Then it's a date. It's a date, Marcus echoed. They sat there for another minute making awkward small talk about the weather and the project deadline coming up next week, and then Sophie's desk phone rang and she had to go answer it. Marcus walked back to his desk in a slight daze, sat down, and stared at his computer screen for a solid 10 minutes before he remembered what he'd been working on. By Friday afternoon, half the office knew that Marcus and Sophie were going on a date, mostly because their co-worker Jennifer had overheard part of the coffee station conversation and possessed exactly zero ability to keep information to herself. Marcus endured approximately 45 minutes of good-natured teasing from the rest of the engineering team before their manager told everyone to get back to work and stop acting like they were in high school. Sophie handled it better than Marcus did, mostly because she was better at ignoring social awkwardness in general. When someone made a comment about office romances, she just shrugged and said, "It's one date." Everyone can calm down. But when she passed Marcus's desk on her way out at 5:30, she paused just long enough to say quietly, "I'm looking forward to tomorrow," and Marcus felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Their first date was at a Thai restaurant in Sophie's neighborhood, a small place with mismatched chairs and string lights hung across the ceiling. Marcus showed up 15 minutes early and spent the time sitting in his car giving himself a pep talk about how this was just dinner with a colleague he liked and there was no reason to be nervous. By the time Sophie arrived exactly on time, Marcus had talked himself into a state of moderate panic. Sophie slid into the seat across from him wearing jeans and a dark blue sweater, and Marcus felt some of his nervousness evaporate. This was still Sophie. Same person he'd eaten lunch with a dozen times. Same person who'd helped him fix his drainage calculations and made fun of his coffee order. The only thing that had changed was the context. "You look terrified," Sophie said, picking up the menu. "I'm not terrified. I'm just out of practice." "How out of practice?" "This is my first date in 3 years." Sophie set down the menu. "Seriously?" "Seriously. My ex-wife was the last person I went on a date with, and that was back when I still thought skinny jeans were a good idea." Sophie laughed. "Okay, that makes me feel better about being nervous." "You're nervous?" "Of course I'm nervous. I asked out a coworker I've known for 6 weeks, and I have no idea if this is going to be great or a disaster that makes Monday morning incredibly awkward." Sophie picked up her water glass and took a drink. "But I figured it was worth the risk." "Why? Why was it worth the risk?" "Yeah, you barely know me. We've had maybe a dozen real conversations. What made you decide to ask me out?" Sophie thought about it for a moment, twisting her napkin between her fingers. "You remember that project meeting 2 weeks ago? The one where David presented that foundation design that was completely wrong and everyone was too polite to say anything?" Marcus nodded. David was a senior engineer who'd been with the firm for 20 years and had a tendency to get defensive when questioned. "You raised your hand," Sophie continued, "and you explained exactly why the design wouldn't work, and you did it in a way that was honest but not cruel. You gave David a way to save face while still fixing the problem. And I sat there thinking, that's the kind of person I want to know better. Someone who's competent and kind at the same time." Marcus felt his face get warm. "That's a pretty low bar. You'd be surprised how rare that combination is." Sophie leaned back in her chair. "Plus, you're easy to talk to. And you laugh at my jokes even when they're not that funny. And you have this thing where you tilt your head slightly when you're thinking through a problem, and it's kind of adorable. I do not do that." "You absolutely do that. You did it 3 times during the coffee station conversation yesterday. Marcus laughed despite himself. Okay, fair. They ordered food, and the conversation flowed the way it always did between them, easy and natural. Sophie told him about growing up in Sacramento, about her parents who ran a small restaurant and worked 7 days a week and still somehow found time to come to every one of her school events. Marcus told her about his family in Montana, about his father who'd been a contractor and taught him to appreciate good craftsmanship, about his younger sister who was a lawyer and called him once a week to make sure he was eating vegetables. Tell me about your marriage, Sophie said when their entrees arrived. If that's not too personal. It's not too personal. Marcus cut into his pad thai. We met in college, got married at 25 because that's what you were supposed to do. Spent 7 years building a life that looked good from the outside but felt hollow on the inside. She finally admitted she wasn't happy, and we ended it as amicably as you can end a marriage. Do you miss her? No. I miss the idea of being married. I miss having someone to come home to, but I don't miss her specifically, which probably tells you everything you need to know about why it ended. Sophie nodded. I was engaged once. 3 years ago, called it off 8 months before the wedding. What happened? He wanted me to quit my job and move to Austin for his career, said we'd start a family right away and I could be a stay-at-home mom, which would have been fine if that's what I wanted, but it's not. I like my career. I like engineering. I like solving problems and building things, and when I told him that, he said I was being selfish. Sophie stabbed at her curry with more force than necessary. So I gave him back the ring and moved to San Francisco and worked myself half to death for 3 years trying to prove something to exactly no one. And now you're here. And now I'm here, in Tacoma, going on a first date with a coworker who probably thinks I'm slightly unhinged for asking him out at the coffee station. I don't think you're unhinged, Marcus said. I think you're brave. Sophie looked at him and something in her expression softened. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a while. After dinner, they walked through Sophie's neighborhood even though it was raining, sharing an umbrella that Sophie had pulled from her bag. Marcus offered to drive her home, but Sophie said she only lived 3 blocks away and wanted the walk. They ended up at a small park with a covered pavilion where they stood watching the rain come down in sheets. This was nice, Sophie said. It was. Marcus hesitated. Can I see you again? Outside of work, I mean. You can see me tomorrow if you want. I'm free all weekend. Tomorrow works. Marcus smiled. What do you want to do? I don't know. Something low-key. Maybe coffee and a walk if the rain stops, or a museum if it doesn't. Sophie turned to face him, and Marcus realized how close they were standing. I just want to keep talking to you. I want that too, Marcus said quietly. Sophie reached up and touched his face, a gentle gesture that made Marcus's heart skip. Can I kiss you? Or is that too fast? It's not too fast. Sophie kissed him softly, and Marcus kissed her back, and for the first time in 2 years he felt like maybe he was ready for this after all. When they pulled apart, Sophie was smiling. Okay, she said. That was worth the risk. Definitely worth the risk, Marcus agreed. Over the next 4 months, Marcus and Sophie navigated the strange territory of dating a coworker while trying to maintain some semblance of professional boundaries. They kept their relationship quiet at work, mostly because neither of them wanted to deal with the inevitable commentary, but their friends figured it out within 2 weeks when someone spotted them having dinner together 3 nights in a row. The relationship worked because they'd been friends first, because they already knew each other's work habits and communication styles. Sophie learned that Marcus was methodical about everything, from grocery shopping to weekend plans, but could be spontaneous when it mattered. Marcus learned that Sophie was fiercely independent, but also deeply loyal, the kind of person who'd drop everything to help a friend move furniture or debug a faulty equation. In December, Sophie's ex-fiancé called her out of the blue, wanting to apologize for how things had ended. His name was Trevor, he worked in tech, and he had the kind of overconfidence that came from a lifetime of being told he was special. Sophie took the call in the parking lot during lunch, and Marcus watched through the office window as her expression went from surprised to annoyed to coldly polite in the space of 3 minutes. When she came back inside, she sat down at her desk without saying anything. Marcus gave her 10 minutes and then walked over with 2 cups of coffee. You okay? He asked quietly. Trevor called. I saw. What did he want? To tell me he made a mistake, that he should have supported my career instead of asking me to give it up. That he's been thinking about me and wondering if we could try again. Sophie took the coffee and wrapped both hands around it like she was trying to warm them. He actually used the phrase, unfinished business. Marcus sat down in the empty chair beside her desk. What did you say? I told him we were finished 3 years ago and I was seeing someone now. He asked who. I said it wasn't his business. He got defensive and said I was clearly still angry about what happened. I told him I wasn't angry, just done, and hung up. Good, Marcus said. Sophie looked at him and Marcus saw something vulnerable in her expression. He said I'd never find someone who understood me the way he did. That I was too intense, too focused on work, too independent for most men. Marcus felt anger flare in his chest, the kind of clean, protective anger that came from watching someone he cared about being diminished. He's wrong. Is he? Yes. Marcus reached over and took Sophie's hand. You're not too anything. You're exactly who you're supposed to be, and anyone who can't handle that doesn't deserve you. Sophie squeezed his hand. You really believe that? I know it. Marcus leaned closer. And for the record, I love that you're focused on your work. I love that you're independent. I love that you asked me out instead of waiting around for me to figure it out. Those aren't flaws. They're the best things about you. Sophie's eyes got bright, and she blinked a few times quickly. You can't say things like that to me at work. I'm going to cry, and then Jennifer is going to ask questions, and this whole thing is going to become office gossip. Too late. It's already office gossip. A fair point. Sophie stood up and pulled Marcus to his feet. Come on, we're taking lunch. They ended up at a small diner 2 blocks from the office, sitting in a booth by the window with sandwiches neither of them was really eating. Sophie told Marcus the full story of her relationship with Trevor, the slow erosion of her confidence, the moment she'd realized that loving someone shouldn't feel like constantly defending yourself. Marcus told her about his marriage, about the loneliness of living with someone who didn't really see you. I was scared to date again, Marcus admitted. After the divorce, I couldn't imagine trusting someone enough to let them in. And then you showed up at the coffee station asking if I was seeing anyone, and suddenly I wasn't scared anymore. You weren't. I was terrified. But it was the good kind of terrified. The kind that meant something was about to change. Sophie smiled. I was terrified too. I almost didn't ask you. I stood at that coffee station for like 5 minutes trying to convince myself to just say it. I'm glad you did. Me too. Sophie reached across the table and laced her fingers through Marcus's. So what happens now? Now we finish our sandwiches, go back to work. Pretend we're just colleagues for another 4 hours, and then I take you to dinner and we stop pretending. I like that plan, Sophie said. 6 months after their first date, Marcus asked Sophie to move in with him. They were sitting on his couch on a Sunday afternoon, supposedly working on a complex foundation design for a project due Monday, but mostly just drinking coffee and arguing good-naturedly about the best approach. Move in with me, Marcus said suddenly. Sophie looked up from her laptop. What? Your lease is up next month. You're here 5 nights a week anyway. We could get a bigger place. Something with an actual office instead of us both working from the couch. Marcus Webb, are you asking me to cohabitate because you want more desk space? I'm asking you to cohabitate because I love you and I want to build a life with you. The desk space is just a bonus. Sophie closed her laptop and set it aside. You love me? Yes, I love you. I've loved you since that project meeting when you corrected David's foundation design in the politest possible way and he actually thanked you for it. Maybe even before that. Sophie laughed. That's such an engineer way to realize you're in love with someone. I'm an engineer. What did you expect? Marcus pulled her closer. So what do you say? Will you move in with me? Yes, Sophie said. Obviously yes. But only if you promise to actually use the desk space for work and not just for storing your collection of vintage engineering textbooks. I make no promises, Marcus said and kissed her. Sophie moved in 8 weeks later on a rainy Saturday in June, and Marcus's apartment stopped feeling like a temporary holding space and started feeling like home. They painted the spare bedroom and turned it into a shared office with 2 desks facing opposite walls. They adopted a cat from the shelter, a gray tabby named Widget, who had a tendency to sleep on their project plans. They kept their relationship professional at work, though everyone knew, and sometimes Marcus would catch Sophie looking at him across the conference room table and feel grateful she'd been brave enough to ask that question at the coffee station. A year later, Marcus proposed on a weekend hiking trip at the top of a trail they'd climbed together on their 3rd date. He'd planned to wait until they got back to the car, maybe propose over dinner somewhere nice, but when they reached the summit and Sophie turned to him with wind-blown hair and a smile that made his heart hurt, Marcus got down on one knee right there on the rocky outcrop. What are you doing? Sophie asked. Proposing, Marcus said, pulling the ring box from his jacket pocket. I was going to wait, but I can't. Sophie Lynn, will you marry me? Sophie stared at the ring, then at Marcus, then back at the ring. You're proposing on a mountain. It's where we had our 3rd date. It felt right. It's perfect.